The artist always committed murder in groups of 4. The 4 victims were arranged like a terrifying performance, and each murder was more meticulous than the last. For 15 years, Detective Sarah Reynolds had studied his performances. 12 completed series, 48 victims, all arranged with artistic precision. When Sarah came home from work that evening, she immediately noticed the unsettling silence. Her husband's car wasn't in the driveway, her son's bike wasn't by the garage, and her daughter's music wasn't echoing from upstairs. The house felt empty in a way that made her detective instincts scream danger. That's when she saw the note waiting for her on the kitchen table, written in elegant handwriting. Dear Detective Reynolds, every artist needs a muse. For 15 years, you have inspired my greatest works. Now I need your participation for my masterpiece. Your husband, your son, your daughter, and finally you. The perfect quartet for my final symphony. The performance begins at dawn. The artist. Sarah looked at the 4 theater tickets attached to the note and realized for the first time that her obsession with catching the killer had turned her family into the stars of the artist's final masterpiece. Something she had never noticed until that very moment. Welcome to a story of obsession, art, and the thin line between hunter and hunted. Before we dive into this psychological thriller, tell me in the comments, have you ever been so focused on something that you lost sight of what really mattered? And if you believe that some cases become personal in the most terrifying ways, hit that subscribe button. This story will haunt you. 15 years earlier, Detective Sarah Reynolds had been a different person. At 27, she was ambitious, methodical, and believed that every case could be solved with enough determination and proper police work. She had just been promoted to the Chicago PD's homicide division when the first 4 bodies were discovered. The crime scene was unlike anything the department had ever encountered. 4 victims, 2 men, 2 women, all in their early 30s, arranged in what could only be described as a tableau. They were positioned in the abandoned Riverside Theater like actors taking their final bow, each dressed in period costumes from different eras of theater history. But it wasn't just the arrangement that made the scene so disturbing. It was the precision. Every detail had been planned with obsessive care. The lighting, the positioning, even the expressions on the victims' faces had been carefully arranged post-mortem to create what the killer clearly viewed as art. And then there was the note, handwritten in elegant calligraphy on expensive paper. It was addressed simply to the detective who will understand. Sarah had been the first officer to find it, tucked carefully between the pages of a theater program left on the stage. Art is not what you see, but what you make others. Thank you for seeing my work. I look forward to our correspondence. The artist. That note changed everything. What should have been a team investigation became Sarah's personal mission. While other detectives focused on forensic evidence and witness statements, Sarah found herself drawn into the killer's mind, trying to understand his artistic vision and predict his next move. The artist had chosen her, and she had chosen to answer his call. Over the following months, Sarah became the department's leading expert on the artist's methods. She studied every aspect of his work, the victim selection, the staging techniques, the symbolic elements he incorporated into each scene. The pattern was as beautiful as it was terrifying. The artist worked in what he called seasons, series of 4 murders that told a cohesive story through their arrangement and symbolism. Each season had a theme: classical tragedy, modern romance, historical epic, contemporary drama. The victims weren't chosen randomly. Each person represented a specific archetype needed for the artist's vision. He would study them for weeks, learning their habits, their personalities, their stories, before incorporating them into his work. They weren't just victims to him. They were collaborators in his artistic process, whether they knew it or not. What made the artist particularly dangerous was his intelligence. He left no forensic evidence, no DNA, no fingerprint. His crime scenes were pristine, except for the carefully planned artistic elements. It was as if he existed only in the moments when he was creating his work, vanishing completely between performances. But he always left notes for Sarah. After each scene she would find a new message, sometimes praising her investigative skills, sometimes offering hints about his next work, always maintaining the tone of an artist corresponding with his most dedicated critic. Detective Reynolds, read one note found after his 3rd season. Your attention to detail is exquisite. You understand that what others see as violence, I see as transformation. Keep watching. The best is yet to come. Sarah kept every note in a locked file cabinet in her basement office. By year 5, she had 48 letters from the artist. By year 10, the number had grown to 96. Each note was analyzed, studied, and memorized. Sarah could recite many of them by heart. Her colleagues began to worry about her. Captain Morrison suggested she take time off, see a department psychologist, work other cases. But Sarah couldn't let go. The artist had made their relationship personal, and she felt responsible for stopping him. Sarah's pursuit of the artist consumed everything. Her marriage to David, once strong and supportive, became strained as she worked longer hours and brought case files home every night. Her children, Emma and Jake, grew accustomed to having dinner without their mother, to hearing her on phone calls at midnight, to finding crime scene photos spread across the kitchen table in the morning. "You're losing yourself in this case," David told her one evening after she missed Jake's middle school graduation, "to follow a lead that went nowhere. The kids barely know you anymore. I barely know you anymore." Sarah knew he was right, but she couldn't explain the pull she felt. The artist had made her part of his work, and she felt responsible for every victim who died while she failed to catch him. Each new season felt like a personal failure. Each note like a taunt that she wasn't smart enough, fast enough, dedicated enough. The breaking point came during the artist's 8th season. Sarah had been so close to identifying him that she could feel it. She'd traced his victim selection pattern, identified his hunting grounds, even predicted the theme of his next work. But when the 4 bodies were discovered in the abandoned Blackstone Hotel, arranged in a scene depicting the death of innocence, Sarah realized she'd been wrong about everything. That night, David moved out, taking Emma and Jake with him. "When you care more about catching this killer than protecting your own family," he said, "you've already lost everything that matters." But Sarah couldn't stop. The artist's latest note had been different, more personal. "Dear Sarah, I hope you don't mind the familiarity, but after 8 seasons together, I feel we've become quite close. Your dedication inspires me. Your sacrifices for our work together haven't gone unnoticed. Soon, I think, we'll be ready for a more direct collaboration." Sarah read that note over and over, trying to understand what direct collaboration meant. She didn't realize that the artist had been watching her just as closely as she'd been hunting him. He knew about her divorce, her isolation, her obsession. He knew that she'd sacrificed everything for their twisted relationship. And he was planning to make that sacrifice complete. For 5 more years, the deadly game continued. The artist completed 4 more seasons, each more elaborate than the last. His notes to Sarah became increasingly intimate, discussing not just his artistic vision, but her personal life, her methods, even her thoughts about his work. "Season 9 was inspired by your own loneliness," read one note. "I see how our work together has isolated you. Don't despair. True artists must suffer for their craft." Sarah's basement office became a shrine to their relationship. She had photographs of every crime scene, copies of every note, detailed psychological profiles that she'd developed over the years. She knew the artist better than she'd ever known her own husband, understood his mind more deeply than her own children's. But the artist was planning something different for his 13th season. Instead of finding new victims, he decided to complete his masterpiece, using the one person who had truly understood his work, Sarah Reynolds herself. The preparation took months. The artist studied Sarah's routine, learned about her estranged family, identified their vulnerabilities. David had remarried and moved to a suburb where he thought the children would be safe. Emma was now 16, an honor student planning for college. Jake was 13, a quiet boy who still asked David why his mother had chosen work over family. The artist found them anyway. The kidnapping was flawlessly executed. David was taken from his architectural firm's parking garage. Emma disappeared from her high school campus during lunch break. Jake vanished while walking home from soccer practice. Each abduction was careful, quiet, professional. No witnesses, no evidence, no trace of where they'd been taken. By the time Sarah discovered the note on her kitchen table, The artist had been preparing his final performance for weeks. The theater tickets directed Sarah to the same abandoned Riverside Theater, where the artist had staged his first season 15 years earlier. The symmetry was intentional. He was bringing their relationship full circle. Sarah arrived at dawn as instructed, her service weapon drawn but her hands trembling. The theater's lobby had been transformed into a gallery showcasing the artist's 15-year career. Photographs from every crime scene lined the walls, along with copies of every note he'd sent her. At the center of the display was a large placard reading, "The Sarah Reynolds Collection, a 15-year collaboration." As Sarah moved deeper into the theater, she could hear classical music playing from the main auditorium. The doors were propped open, and stage lights illuminated a scene that made her blood run cold. 3 chairs were arranged on the stage. David sat in the first, Emma in the second, Jake in the third. All were unconscious but breathing, carefully positioned like actors waiting for their cue. A 4th chair sat empty, clearly intended for Sarah. "Welcome to my masterpiece," came a voice from the theater's sound system. "Please, Detective Reynolds, take your place on stage. Your family is waiting for the performance to begin." Sarah could see speakers positioned throughout the theater, but no sign of the artist himself. He was directing his final work from somewhere hidden, maintaining the distance that had always characterized their relationship. "For 15 years, you've been my muse," the voice continued. "Your dedication, your sacrifice, your willingness to lose everything in pursuit of understanding my art, it's been inspirational. Now, together we'll create something truly transcendent." Sarah moved toward the stage, scanning for any sign of where the artist might be hiding. The theater's old architecture provided dozens of possible concealment spots: the lighting booth, the fly gallery, the orchestra pit. "The theme of this final season," the artist explained, "is the cost of obsession. 4 victims who represent the price of pursuing art above all else. The husband who was abandoned, the children who were neglected, and the detective who sacrificed everything for a case that consumed her soul." As Sarah reached the stage, she realized that the artist's final work wasn't just about killing her family. It was about forcing her to confront the choices she'd made over the past 15 years. "You know, Sarah," the voice said conversationally, "I've always admired your dedication. Most people would have given up after the first few seasons. But you kept going, kept sacrificing, kept proving that you understood the importance of art above all else." Sarah checked David's pulse, steady but weak. Emma and Jake were both drugged but alive. Whatever the artist had planned, he wanted them conscious for the finale. "I've prepared a special choice for you," the artist continued. "On the table beside you, you'll find a syringe, a simple paralytic agent, painless, reversible, but it will render you immobile for the final scene. If you inject yourself voluntarily, I'll allow your family to leave after the performance. They'll remember nothing, and they'll be free to rebuild their lives without you." Sarah saw the syringe on a small table positioned between the chair. Next to it was a note that read, "The artist's final sacrifice, herself for her art. If you refuse," the artist's voice grew colder, "then I'll be forced to improvise. Your family will become unwilling participants in a much more dramatic conclusion." Sarah realized the twisted logic of the artist's plan. He was offering her the same choice she'd been making for 15 years. Her family's safety in exchange for her complete surrender to the case that had consumed her life. "You see, Sarah, this was always where we were headed. From that first note 15 years ago, I knew you were special. I knew you'd be willing to sacrifice everything for the sake of understanding true art." As Sarah stood on the stage where the artist had begun his career, she understood that he'd been manipulating her from the very beginning. Every note, every crime scene, every personal detail he'd incorporated into his work, it had all been designed to bring her to this moment. But the artist had made one critical error in his planning. He'd assumed that 15 years of obsession had broken her, that she'd choose the same pattern of sacrifice that had defined their relationship. He didn't know that losing her family had taught Sarah something more important than catching any killer. Some things matter more than the case. What the artist didn't know was that Sarah had spent the last 3 months preparing for this confrontation. After receiving increasingly personal notes throughout his 12th season, She'd realized that he was building towards something involving her directly. Instead of waiting passively for his next move, Sarah had done something she'd never done before. She'd stopped trying to think like the artist, and started thinking like the detective she'd been before he consumed her life. Hidden in her jacket was a micro-transmitter connected to a SWAT team positioned 3 blocks away. The device had been recording everything since she'd entered the theater, capturing the artist's voice and his detailed confession to 15 years of murder. More importantly, Sarah had spent weeks studying the old Riverside Theater's blueprints, identifying every possible hiding spot, every entrance and exit, every line of sight that would allow someone to observe the stage while remaining hidden. The lighting booth was accessible through a narrow staircase hidden behind the theater's main curtain. Sarah had studied the blueprints carefully, noting that it was the only position that would allow someone to see the entire stage while remaining concealed from anyone in the auditorium. "You want to meet your muse face to face?" Sarah called out. "Then stop hiding behind your speakers, and come down here like the artist you claim to be." There was a long pause. Then slowly, a figure emerged from the shadows of the upper gallery. The artist was smaller than Sarah had imagined. A thin man in his 50s wearing an expensive suit and wire-rimmed glasses. He looked more like a college professor than a serial killer. "Professor Marcus Holloway," Sarah said, recognizing him from the university faculty photos she'd studied during her investigation. "Theater Arts Department, Northwestern University. 15 years ago you were passed over for tenure. Your experimental productions were considered too avant-garde for commercial success." Holloway's face showed surprise that she'd identified him, but he maintained his composure. "Very good, detective. I wondered if you'd piece it together. You started killing because nobody appreciated your artistic vision," Sarah continued. "But you couldn't create real art, so you decided to create death scenes and call them performances." Holloway descended the stairs slowly, a small pistol in his hand. "My work transcends traditional boundaries between art and life. Each season explores themes that conventional theater could never address." "Your work is murder," Sarah replied flatly. "Dress it up however you want, but you're just a failed artist who kills people because nobody wanted to watch your plays." The psychological attack was deliberate. Sarah had spent years studying Holloway's notes, understanding his need for intellectual validation. By dismissing his artistic pretensions, she was attacking the core of his identity. "You don't understand," Holloway said, his voice rising. "Each scene required months of planning, careful victim selection, precise staging. The emotional impact, the symbolic resonance. It's more powerful than anything you'd see on Broadway." "It's more powerful because it's real," Sarah agreed. "But that doesn't make it art. It makes it pathetic." Holloway had reached the stage now, his weapon trained on Sarah, but his hands trembling slightly. 15 years of careful control were breaking down under Sarah's psychological assault. "You want to know what's really pathetic?" Sarah continued. "You've spent 15 years trying to get my attention, trying to make me understand your vision. And I've never been impressed. Your staging is amateur, your symbolism is heavy-handed, and your writing is pretentious garbage." Each criticism hit Holloway like a physical blow. His entire identity was built around the belief that his work was sophisticated art, that only the most intelligent observers could appreciate. "The only reason I kept investigating your cases was because it was my job," Sarah said. "Not because I found your work compelling. Every detective in the department thought you were just another psychopath with delusions of grandeur." "That's not true," Holloway said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Your letters to the department, your analysis of my techniques, you understood the deeper meanings." "I understood that you were dangerous," Sarah replied. "That's not the same thing as being impressed." Sarah was positioning herself between Holloway and her family, using his need for validation to draw him closer. She could see that his weapon wasn't steadily aimed. He was too focused on defending his artistic reputation to maintain proper control. "Even this final performance," Sarah said, gesturing at the staged scene around them. "It's not original. The kidnapped family, the forced choice, the villain revealing his master plan. It's every bad thriller movie ever made." Holloway's face flushed with anger. You're wrong. This transcends genre conventions. The emotional authenticity, the real stakes are that you're going to prison for the rest of your life, Sarah interrupted. And 20 years from now, nobody will remember your name. Your seasons will be footnotes in criminology textbooks, not celebrated as art. That was the breaking point. Holloway lunged forward, his need to silence Sarah's criticism overriding his careful planning. But Sarah was ready for him. Sarah's years of police training and detective work had kept her in excellent physical condition, while Holloway was an academic who relied on planning and surprise rather than physical confrontation. When he lunged at her, Sarah was able to sidestep his attack and knock the weapon from his hand. The struggle that followed was brief but intense. Holloway fought with the desperation of someone whose entire worldview was collapsing. But Sarah fought with the controlled aggression of someone protecting her family. Within moments, Sarah had Holloway pinned to the stage floor, his hands secured behind his back with zip ties she'd brought specifically for this purpose. The weapon was kicked safely away from both of them. "Detective Reynolds, report your status," came a voice through her hidden transmitter. The SWAT team had been listening to everything. "Suspect in custody," Sarah replied. "3 civilians require medical attention. Drugged but stable. Scene is secure." As sirens approached the theater, Sarah moved to check on her family. David was beginning to regain consciousness, blinking groggily as the effects of whatever drug Holloway had used started to wear off. "Sarah?" he whispered. "What happened? Where are we?" "It's over," Sarah said simply. "The case is closed." Emma and Jake were stirring as well, confused and frightened but unharmed. Sarah helped them sit up, checking their pupils and pulse rates to ensure they weren't in any immediate danger. Holloway lay on the stage floor, no longer the mysterious artist who had haunted Sarah's life for 15 years. Without his elaborate staging and psychological manipulation, he looked exactly like what he was, a bitter, failed academic who had committed terrible crimes to feed his own ego.
"You don't understand," he said weakly. "My work will be studied for generations. The psychological complexity, the artistic vision. Your work is evidence in a criminal trial," Sarah replied. "That's all it's ever been." The next several hours passed in a blur of police procedures, medical examinations, and evidence collection. Holloway was taken into custody and charged with 48 counts of first-degree murder, 4 counts of kidnapping, and numerous other charges that would ensure he spent the rest of his life in prison. The theater became a crime scene, with technicians documenting Holloway's gallery and collecting evidence that would be used in his trial. The photographs and notes that he'd displayed as art were carefully cataloged as exhibits in what would become one of Chicago's most significant serial killer prosecutions. Sarah's family was taken to the hospital for observation, where doctors confirmed that they'd been drugged with a mild sedative, but suffered no lasting physical harm. The psychological impact would take longer to assess and treat. David was the first to speak to Sarah privately. "I need to understand something," he said as they sat in the hospital waiting room. "Why did you never tell us how dangerous this case had become?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Because I was so focused on catching him that I didn't realize I was putting you at risk. I thought keeping you separate from the case would keep you safe." "But it didn't," Emma said, joining the conversation. She was pale but alert, processing what had happened with the analytical mind she'd inherited from her mother. "He knew everything about us because you were so obsessed with him." Sarah nodded. "You're right. My obsession with the case made you all targets. I'm sorry." Jake, who had been quiet since regaining consciousness, finally spoke up. "Are you going to keep being a detective?" It was a question Sarah had been asking herself for the past few hours. The case that had defined her career was closed, but at a cost that she was only beginning to understand. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Right now, I just want to focus on being your mother." Professor Marcus Holloway's trial became a media sensation, with legal experts and psychologists debating whether his crimes could be classified as art or simply the actions of a deranged individual. The prosecution successfully argued that regardless of Holloway's artistic pretensions, he was a cold-blooded killer who had murdered 48 people for his own gratification. Sarah testified as the lead investigator, walking the jury through 15 years of evidence, and explaining how Holloway's psychological manipulation had been designed to create a personal relationship with her as the investigating officer. "The defendant wanted me to believe I was his collaborator," Sarah explained during her testimony. "Every note,
Every staged scene was designed to make me feel responsible for his actions and invested in his continued crime. Holloway's defense team tried to argue diminished capacity, claiming that their client genuinely believed he was creating art rather than committing murder. But the careful planning evident in each crime, combined with his ability to evade capture for 15 years, demonstrated clear awareness of the criminal nature of his actions. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Holloway was sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. During his sentencing hearing, Holloway was given the opportunity to make a statement. He used the time to deliver a rambling monologue about artistic vision and societal failure to appreciate true creativity. He never expressed remorse for his victims or acknowledged the suffering he'd caused their families. Sarah watched from the gallery, but felt nothing except relief that the case was finally closed. The months following Holloway's conviction were difficult for Sarah and her family. David had remarried, but he and his new wife agreed that Emma and Jake needed time to rebuild their relationship with their mother. Family therapy sessions were awkward at first, with years of anger and resentment to work through. Emma was particularly direct in expressing her feelings about Sarah's choices. "You chose a job over your family," Emma said during one session. "How do we know you won't do it again?" Sarah didn't have easy answers, but she committed to being present in ways she hadn't been before. She attended Emma's volleyball games, helped Jake with his homework, and made dinner plans that she actually kept. Gradually, trust began to rebuild. Sarah took a leave of absence from the Chicago PD to focus on her family, using the time to reconnect with the people she'd neglected for 15 years. "I can't undo the choices I made," Sarah told her children during a family meeting 6 months after Holloway's arrest. "But I can promise that going forward, you'll always be more important than any case." David was cautiously supportive of Sarah's efforts to rebuild relationships with Emma and Jake. "They need their mother," he told her, "but they need to know that you choose them over everything else." It was a commitment Sarah was determined to keep. A year after Holloway's conviction, Sarah returned to police work, but in a different capacity. Instead of homicide investigation, she joined the Chicago PD's training division, teaching courses on serial crime investigation and the psychological pitfalls of long-term cases. "The most dangerous part of hunting a serial killer," she would tell new detectives, "isn't the killer himself. It's losing yourself in the pursuit." Sarah's experience with the artist case became a cautionary tale used in police academies across the country. Her story illustrated how even experienced investigators could become psychologically compromised by extended exposure to a manipulative suspect. Detective Reynolds' case demonstrates the importance of maintaining professional boundaries, explained Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a criminal psychologist who studied the Holloway investigation. When investigators become personally invested in a suspect's approval or acknowledgement, they lose their objectivity and become vulnerable to manipulation. Sarah agreed to participate in several academic studies examining the psychological impact of serial crime investigation on law enforcement personnel. Her willingness to discuss her mistakes openly helped develop new protocols for supporting officers working long-term cases. "I thought dedication meant never giving up," Sarah said during a conference presentation. "But I learned that sometimes the most dedicated thing you can do is recognize when a case is costing you more than it's worth." The protocols developed based on Sarah's experience included mandatory rotation of primary investigators on serial cases, regular psychological evaluations for officers working high-stress investigations, and improved support systems for the families of law enforcement personnel. Emma graduated from high school with honors and decided to study criminal justice in college, inspired by her mother's work but determined to maintain better balance between career and personal life. "I want to help people like my mom did," Emma explained during her college application interview. "But I also learned from watching her that you can't save everyone, and trying to do so can cost you the people who matter most." Jake channeled his experience into writing, creating short stories that explored themes of obsession and family loyalty. His high school English teacher noted that his writing showed unusual insight into complex psychological dynamics. "Having a front-row seat to a serial killer investigation gives you a different perspective on human nature," Jake said when asked about his writing inspiration. "I learned that evil people are often very ordinary, and that good people can make terrible choices." Sarah's relationship with her family continued to improve, as she demonstrated her commitment to prioritizing them over her career. She missed fewer school events, took real vacations, and learned to leave work at work. The hardest part was forgiving myself, Sarah admitted during a later interview. I had to accept that my obsession with catching Holloway had made me a worse mother and wife, even though I thought I was protecting my family by solving the case. David eventually remarried, but he and Sarah maintained a cooperative co-parenting relationship. "She's a different person now," he said when asked about Sarah's transformation. "The obsession that consumed her for 15 years is gone. She's present in ways she never was before." Today, Marcus Holloway remains in prison, where he continues to write lengthy letters about his artistic vision to anyone who will read them. Most of his correspondence goes unanswered, and his requests for interviews are typically denied. Sarah keeps one of his final letters framed in her office, not as a trophy but as a reminder of how persuasive manipulation can be when it appeals to professional pride and personal dedication. The letter reads, "Dear Detective Reynolds, I hope you understand that our 15-year collaboration was the greatest work of both our careers. You may have captured me, but our artistic partnership will be remembered long after we're both gone." Sarah's response was never sent, but she wrote it anyway. "Professor Holloway, you were never my partner. You were a case I solved. That's all you'll ever be." The story of Sarah Reynolds and Marcus Holloway serves as a powerful reminder that the line between dedication and obsession can be dangerously thin. Sarah's 15-year pursuit of the artist began with professional duty but became a personal compulsion that nearly cost her everything that mattered. Her eventual victory came not from superior investigative skills or psychological insight, but from remembering what she was really fighting for. Not the abstract concept of justice, but the concrete reality of protecting her family. In the end, the most important lesson Sarah learned wasn't about catching killers. It was about knowing when to stop hunting and start living. So I ask you, have you ever been so focused on achieving a goal that you lost sight of why it mattered? Have you ever sacrificed the present for a future that might never come? Because Sarah Reynolds' story teaches us that sometimes the most important victory is knowing when to walk away from a fight. If this story of obsession, sacrifice, and redemption moved you, share it with someone who needs to remember that success means nothing if you lose yourself achieving it. Subscribe to make sure you never miss stories that explore the complex psychology of justice and the price we pay for our commitment. Remember, in a world where dedication is praised and persistence is celebrated, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit that some pursuits cost more than they're worth. And sometimes the real victory isn't catching the villain. It's saving yourself from becoming one.